Hello, today we are going to talk about 8 shocking criminal cases involving women from Texas. Deborah Lynn Baker. The story begins with Jerry Sternadell, a self-made millionaire in Clay County, Texas, who built a fortune worth millions of dollars from a horse ranch and a plumbing company during the 1980s. Coming from a poor background, he became known as a tough, frugal, and practical man. After 2 failed marriages, in 1982, Jerry married Lou Ann, a young and beautiful woman, but soon realized how different their lifestyles were. While Jerry stuck to his frugal habits, Lou Ann indulged in luxury, shopping, travel, and parties. This contrast quickly became the root of conflict. In 1986, Lou Ann introduced her best friend, Deborah Lynn Baker, a 30-year-old accountant, who then became Jerry's secretary and bookkeeper. On the surface, Deborah seemed dedicated, but in reality, she and Lou Ann secretly embezzled tens of thousands of dollars from the company. They fabricated invoices, withdrew cash, and made fraudulent transfers. Jerry gradually noticed the irregularities, which led to heated arguments. In early 1990, he decided to file for divorce from Lou Ann and threatened to prosecute Deborah for embezzlement. Afraid of prison, Deborah chose a ruthless path, poisoning Jerry with arsenic. She purchased the poison, then commonly found in pesticides, and secretly mixed it into the cran apple juice Jerry often drank. The plan was carried out in early June 1990. The small initial doses only caused nausea, stomach pain, and diarrhea, leading doctors to misdiagnose it as a stomach illness. But the poison built up over time, causing exhaustion and violent seizures. Jerry was hospitalized in critical condition. In his final lucid moments, he left a damning dying declaration. "Lou Ann and Deborah poisoned me. They put poison in my juice." This became a key piece of evidence. Even so, Deborah continued to appear at the hospital, pretending to care for him, perhaps to cover her tracks or monitor the outcome. On June 12, 1990, Jerry died at the age of 54. An autopsy revealed arsenic levels in his body hundreds of times higher than the lethal dose. Investigators found a bottle of arsenic hidden in a storage unit Deborah had rented, along with falsified bookkeeping records proving embezzlement. Lou Ann was suspected of being an accomplice, but escaped charges due to lack of direct evidence. Deborah, on the other hand, was arrested in July 1990 and indicted for first-degree murder. The 1994 trial was considered one of the most controversial cases in Texas. Prosecutors emphasized the mix of greed and betrayal, presenting evidence including the dying declaration, the arsenic bottle, and financial records. However, the jury, swayed by Deborah's frail appearance and the argument that she was merely Lou Ann's pawn, delivered a shocking verdict: 10 years of probation and a fine of $10,000 instead of life imprisonment or the death penalty. This decision was widely viewed as a miscarriage of justice. Deborah continued down the criminal path. In 1999, she violated probation by writing fraudulent checks. Her suspended sentence was revoked, and in 2003, she was formally sentenced to 10 years in prison. After serving her term, she was released in 2013, living quietly away from the public eye. Suzanne Margaret Basso. Suzanne Margaret Basso, born in 1954 in New York, grew up in a violent household. Her traumatic childhood, marked by abuse from her father, distorted her personality, especially her desire to control and manipulate others. Basso was once married and had 2 children, but after her husband's death, she struggled to make ends meet in Texas, working as a security guard and a seamstress. Although she was not ill, she often pretended to be frail, using a wheelchair to gain pity and exploit people's trust. On the other side of the story was Louis Buddy Musso, born in 1939 in New Jersey. He had a mild intellectual disability, was gentle, had a low IQ, and was easily deceived. After his wife passed away, Musso lived a simple life, working at a supermarket and receiving social security benefits. He was lonely but optimistic, loved music, and often took part in community activities. In 1997, at a church fair, Musso met Basso. From then on, they maintained a relationship through letters and phone calls. Basso appeared gentle, promising love and marriage, while carefully persuading Musso to name her as the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. For Musso, it was a chance to find a home. For Basso, it was nothing more than a scheme to steal money. On June 14th, 1998, Musso left New Jersey with trust and hope, carrying his dream of a new family to live with Basso in Texas. But as soon as he arrived, he stepped into a nightmare. Basso did not live alone. She was with a group of accomplices, including her son James O'Malley, Bernice Miller and her children, and Terrence Singleton. Together, they quickly turned Musso into a slave, forcing him to do housework, starving him, depriving him of sleep, and gradually torturing him. For 16 days, Musso endured brutal abuse, beaten with belts, heavy shoes, and a baseball bat. His skin burned with cigarettes, doused with cleaning chemicals, and scrubbed with a wire brush. He was forced to sit on a child's play mat while being humiliated and assaulted. The result was a body covered in injuries, multiple broken bones, chemical burns, and severe bruising. On August 25th, 1998, Musso died from multiple blunt force traumas. His weight had dropped to under 110 pounds due to starvation. To cover up the crime, the group dressed his body in clean clothes and dumped it on the roadside in Galena Park, Harris County. However, police quickly traced them through correspondence and phone records. The autopsy, along with testimony from accomplices, made it clear Suzanne Basso was the ringleader. At the 1999 trial, Basso continued to feign mental illness and sat in a wheelchair, but her act was rejected. Evidence showed that her motive was nothing but greed and cruelty. In the end, Basso was sentenced to death. Her accomplices received prison terms ranging from 20 to 80 years, while Bernice Miller's daughter was released after serving more than 10 years. On February 5th, 2014, after numerous failed appeals, Basso was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville Prison in Texas. She became the 14th woman in the United States to be executed since 1976. Her final words were, "I'm sorry for what happened to Buddy Musso." Nicole, Nikki Baukus. Nicole Nadra, Nikki Baukus, born in 1989 in Houston, Texas, grew up in Conroe and was known among friends as a hard partying girl. Her life was far from easy. At the age of 18, Nikki lost her high school boyfriend in a drunk driving accident, a tragedy that should have been a wake-up call. But instead of changing, she sank deeper into alcohol, drugs, and aimless late nights. On the night of June 29, 2012, at only 23 years old, Nikki went to On the Rocks bar in South Montgomery County. In just over 4 hours, she consumed 21 alcoholic drinks, 4 beers, and 17 shots of liquor. Although she was clearly intoxicated, the bar staff continued serving her. Later, the bar was ordered to pay $1 million in damages to the victims' families for violating Texas dram shop laws. Close to 2 a.m., Nikki phoned a friend, slurring her words, admitting she had just vomited in her truck, but was still attempting to drive her Ford F-150 home. Her blood alcohol level was determined to be 3 to 4 times the legal limit, with traces of marijuana and sedatives in her system. Despite this, Nikki got behind the wheel, and tragedy struck around 3 a.m. on Interstate 45. In her drunken state, Nikki drove the wrong way and crashed head-on into a Chevrolet Aveo. The devastating impact killed 19-year-old Nicole Adams and 18-year-old Travis Saunders instantly. Their friend, 22-year-old David Porras, survived but suffered severe injuries, requiring more than a dozen surgeries and leaving him with permanent disabilities. At the scene, Nikki initially denied responsibility, blaming a man and later even her father. But the evidence was undeniable. Her DNA was found on the airbag and steering wheel, and her blood-stained left shoe and sock were wedged inside the wrecked vehicle. Under mounting evidence, Nikki eventually admitted she had been driving, but claimed she couldn't remember, even suggesting she had been drugged. The trial, in August 2013, quickly became a focal point of public attention in Texas. At first, Nikki pleaded not guilty, but later changed her testimony, breaking down in tears and apologising. "I don't deserve to live. I should have died in that crash." However, the victims' families saw this as insincere. Prosecutors highlighted her reckless lifestyle and her failure to learn from past tragedy. In the end, Nikki was sentenced to a total of 38 years in prison, 15 years for each count of manslaughter, and 8 years for aggravated assault with a vehicle, to be served consecutively. She must serve at least 19 years before becoming eligible for parole, projected around 2031 to 2032. She is currently incarcerated at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Unwilling to accept the verdict, in 2017 and 2018, Nikki and her new attorney filed appeals, claiming police had planted evidence and pointing to alleged flaws in the case. However, appellate courts rejected all her petitions. For the victims' families, these efforts felt like a slap in the face, as their wounds had never truly healed. Celeste Beard. Celeste Beard Johnson is one of the most shocking figures in American true crime history. A woman who rose from a poor waitress to a life of luxury, only to throw it all away through murder. Celeste was born in 1963 in California. Her childhood was tragic, abandoned by her biological parents and sexually abused by her adoptive father. She married young, had twin daughters, and went through several failed marriages. In 1993, her life took a dramatic turn when she met Stephen Beard, a 69-year-old widowed media millionaire. He was captivated by the beauty and charm of the young waitress. 2 years later, they married. Stephen provided Celeste and her daughters with a life of extravagance, a mansion, luxury cars, and unlimited spending. But Celeste's wasteful lifestyle soon became a source of conflict. In just the final months of 1999, she spent nearly $700,000 on shopping and travel. Stephen once once threatened divorce, but Celeste knew that if that happened, she would receive only a small portion compared to the vast fortune she stood to inherit upon his death. By 1999, Celeste had fallen into depression and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. There, she met Tracy Tarleton, a lesbian woman undergoing treatment. They quickly became close and eventually entered into a romantic relationship. Celeste complained that Stephen abused her, painting him as a monster, and promised that if he died, she and Tracy could live together. Those words slowly turned Tracy into a pawn in Celeste's ruthless plan. On October 2nd, 1999, under Celeste's direction, Tracy broke into Stephen's private bedroom and shot him in the stomach with a shotgun while he slept. Stephen initially survived but was gravely injured, requiring surgery to remove hundreds of shotgun pellets. After several months, he died from complications, officially turning the shooting into a murder case. Celeste, however, appeared calm, continued her lavish spending, and even remarried a young bartender just months after Stephen's death. Meanwhile, investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Tracy was arrested when the weapon at the scene matched her shotgun. At first, Tracy stayed silent to protect Celeste, but when she realised Celeste had betrayed her, she revealed the entire plan. Celeste's twin daughters also testified in court, stating that their mother had once slipped sleeping pills into Stephen's food and frequently wished for his death to gain his fortune. In 2003, Celeste went to trial in Austin. Prosecutors invoked Texas's law of parties, holding her responsible for orchestrating and manipulating the crime, even though she never pulled the trigger herself. Tracy became the key witness, admitting that she had been manipulated by Celeste. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Celeste was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole before 2042. Tracy, due to her cooperation, received a reduced sentence and was released in 2011. Cindy Lou Beck. In the summer of 2010, the rural peace of Polk County, Oregon, was shattered by a shocking crime in which greed and psychological manipulation drove a young man to murder his own parents. David Scott Jondal, 61, and his wife, Marilyn Ruth Jondal, 58, owned the Abundant Life Farm, where they raised livestock and grew organic produce. They had one son, Andrew Thomas Jondal, then 20 years old, who lived with them and helped with the farm. Andrew was described as naive, inexperienced, and easily influenced. His life changed when he met Cindy Lou Beck, 46, a woman burdened with personal troubles, divorced, stripped of custody of her children, behind on rent, and self-proclaimed as a psychic. Within just weeks of dating, Cindy, 26 years older than Andrew, became his first love. Andrew's parents strongly disapproved, fearing their son was being exploited, but their opposition only pushed Andrew closer to Cindy, and he often stayed at her apartment in Salem. There, Cindy began playing her spiritual card, claiming that spirits told her Andrew's parents had to die in order for the couple to have a future. She painted a vision of Abundant Life Farm, a valuable property Andrew would inherit, as something that could be sold to pay off her debts and support her children. Greed and emotional dependency made Andrew fall under her sway. On the night of August 30th, 2010, Andrew returned to the farm. When his father, David, noticed something unusual in the garage, Andrew struck him repeatedly with a metal pipe and then stabbed him multiple times with a scythe, killing him instantly. He then went inside the house and murdered his mother, Marilyn, with the same metal pipe. To stage the scene as a robbery, Andrew took credit cards, cash, and jewellery. Meanwhile, Cindy waited for him at her Salem apartment, where she helped dispose of his bloodstained clothing and devised a cover story. The next morning, a water delivery worker discovered David's body in the garage and alerted police. The investigation quickly focused on Andrew. Just 2 days later, on September 1st, 2010, Andrew and Cindy were arrested. During questioning, Andrew confessed and revealed that Cindy had been the mastermind, manipulating him with her fake psychic visions. Cindy denied the allegations, but evidence and Andrew's testimony sealed her fate. In July 2011, Andrew pled guilty to aggravated murder and was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole for at least 50 years. Cindy pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and received a 20-year sentence. But the tragedy did not end there. In 2012, Cindy was prosecuted again and pled guilty in a separate child sexual abuse case, receiving an additional 16-year sentence. Her total prison time could extend to 36 years. Betty Lou Beets, Betty Lou, born Betty Lou Dunavant, lost her hearing at the age of 3 due to measles. Growing up in poverty, she was also subjected to sexual abuse by her biological father, while her mother suffered from mental illness and had to be institutionalized. This traumatic childhood left deep psychological scars, making it difficult for Betty to find stability in her life. At 15, Betty married, for the first time, to Robert Franklin Branson, but happiness was short-lived, replaced by frequent beatings. Throughout her life, Betty married a total of 6 times, even remarrying Branson once, and most of her marriages were plagued by domestic violence. Notably, in 1970 she shot her second husband, Billy York Lane, but escaped conviction after the incident was ruled self-defense. By the 1980s, Betty was living in Gun Barrel City, Texas, with her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, a retired firefighter. He was gentle, had a life insurance policy worth $110,000, and received a monthly pension, with Betty as the beneficiary, and that made him her target. In fact, Betty had already killed her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, with a pistol, and had her daughter help bury his body beneath a storage shed. The crime went undiscovered, emboldening Betty to become even more reckless. On August 6, 1983, she decided to strike again. That night, while her husband was asleep, Betty used a .38 revolver to shoot Jimmy Don to death. She then conspired with her son, Robert, to bury his body in a wishing well in the front yard. To cover her tracks, Betty staged a disappearance. She placed his heart medication on his boat, set it adrift on the lake, and reported him missing. For a time, Betty lived as a grieving widow, and even attempted to collect on the insurance policy. But in 1985, police received a tip, dug up her yard, and discovered not only Jimmy Don's remains, but also those of Doyle Wayne Barker. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, Betty was arrested. At her 1985 trial, prosecutors emphasized her financial motives. The testimony of her 2 children, Robert and Shirley, sealed her fate, as they described in detail how their mother planned the murders and forced them to help cover them up. Betty denied the charges, even blaming her son, but the jury was unconvinced. On October 11th, 1985, she was sentenced to death for murder for financial gain. Defense attorneys later argued that Betty had been a lifelong victim of abuse, and that her past should have been considered as a mitigating factor. But the courts upheld her conviction, finding the financial evidence and witness testimony far too compelling. Ashley Paige Benton. In the summer of 2006 in Houston, Texas, a tragic incident occurred, stemming from tensions between 2 groups of teenagers and leaving a lasting impact on the community. At the center of the case was 16-year-old Ashley Paige Benton and 15-year-old Gabrielle Granillo, a young member of the notorious MS-13 gang. Ashley grew up in a troubled family, had been involved in school fights and possession of sharp objects, but had no prior criminal record. She often associated with a small group known as Crazy Crew, essentially just teenagers engaging in minor rebellious behavior. In contrast, Gabriel, nicknamed Pelon, was a boy of Salvadoran descent who had joined MS-13 at 14 after enduring much hardship. His mother had died young, his father was deported for serious crimes, and he himself had spent time in juvenile detention. The conflict began at Lamar High School. Considered Crazy Crew's territory, an MS-13 member mocked Ashley's friends, and tensions escalated. On June 6, 2006, both groups agreed to meet at Irvin Chew Park, a family park that on that day turned into a battlefield. Crazy Crew numbered about 20 to 30, roughly double the MS-13 side, while the MS group carried baseball bats. Ashley was not a core member but worried for her friends. Prior to the fight, she had bought a double-edged knife, 14 centimeters long, for $8. During the chaos, Gabrielle, viewed as the MS-13 leader that day, approached Ashley. According to her testimony, Gabrielle swung a baseball bat at her twice, causing her to panic and stab in defense. The fatal wound pierced Gabrielle's heart and he collapsed, dying almost instantly. Evidence at the scene showed that Gabrielle's bat bore traces of blood, confirming it had been used. Ashley was arrested shortly thereafter. In interrogation, she broke down in tears and expressed deep remorse. Yet the legal proceedings proved controversial. Since Ashley was only 16, questions arose about the validity of her statement, which had been taken without a parent or attorney present. Prosecutors chose to try her as an adult on a murder charge. The 2007 trial ended in a hung jury. Half believed she had acted in self-defense, while the other half viewed it as intentional murder. As a result, the case was declared a mistrial, and Ashley accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. She was sentenced to 5 years of deferred adjudication probation, required to complete 300 hours of community service, pay $4,000 in restitution for funeral expenses, earn her GED, and report regularly for supervision. If she complied fully, her record would be cleared. In reality, by 2009, Ashley's probation was terminated early. Kenisha Berry, Beaumont, Texas, a small town, once witnessed one of the most tragic cases in its history, forever tied to the name Kenisha Aronda Berry. Born into an ordinary family, Kenisha was a rather shy girl who dropped out of school, but later earned her high school equivalency diploma. She worked at a correctional facility in Dayton before becoming a childcare worker. On the surface, Kenisha was seen as a devoted mother, caring for her children with her longtime partner, Joskin Love. But beneath that image, she carried deep psychological struggles few knew about. In November 1998, at just 20 years old, Kenisha gave birth to a baby baby boy she named Malachi. Unlike the 3 children she would have later, this pregnancy was kept completely secret. Just a few days after giving birth, in a state of panic and despair, Kenisha wrapped Malachi in a plastic bag and left him in a trash bin near the Park apartments. The infant did not survive. When his body was discovered, the community gave him the heartbreaking name Baby Hope. The case shocked the entire city, but the identity of the mother remained a mystery for many years. 5 years later, in June 2003, another incident occurred. An 83-year-old man happened to find a newborn baby girl abandoned in a drainage ditch, her body covered in fire ant bites. Miraculously, the baby survived and was later named Paris. This time, investigators quickly traced the case back to Kenisha. She admitted that Paris was her daughter and even led police to the site where she had once discarded a pillowcase, the exact place where Malachi had been found in 1998. That eerie link uncovered the painful truth hidden for 5 years. DNA testing confirmed that Kenisha was the mother of both Paris and Malachi. Fingerprints found on the tape used in Malachi's case also matched hers. At last, the mystery of Baby Hope was solved. Investigators noticed a pattern. Kenisha only concealed pregnancies that occurred outside her relationship with Joskin Love. They believed she feared being exposed, losing her partner's love, or facing social judgment, and chose extreme measures to hide the truth. In 2004, Kenisha went to trial for the murder of Malachi. Prosecutors argued that her actions were deliberate, while the defense claimed she was suffering from depression and psychological crisis. Although she was described as a devoted mother to her other children, her actions in these 2 cases made it difficult for the public to sympathize. Ultimately, Kenisha was sentenced to death. However, in 2007, her sentence was reduced to life imprisonment, with eligibility for parole only after serving at least 40 years. As for the case involving Paris, she was also charged with child abandonment, though the exact outcome of that charge was not widely publicized. If you enjoyed this video and are looking forward to part 2, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to support our channel.